Your
You are
sound
able to
is,
hear me?
yes. Oh, Professor Rajat Dev.
Oh, hello, Rajat.
Hello, sir.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Hello,
Oh.
namaste everyone.
Hello.
Getting old.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Professor Pattanaik, sir.
Yes.
Today, two of more distinguished speakers have just joined. One is Professor Yang Sheng Su, and another is Professor Maurice Salis.
Oh, I see. Okay. Hello. Will they hear me if I speak?
Yes,
Can they
yes,
hear me?
of course.
Hello, Maurice. Hello, Yongsheng. And hello, Rajat again. Thank you for joining this session.
Hi, Prasanta. Good to see you.
Seeing you.
Professor Maurice Salis, can you hear us?
Hello, Maurice. Can you hear me? No, probably not.
Professor Maurice Salis, you have to unmute so that we can hear your
We can't
voice.
see him.
Probably he's taking some time.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Maurice Salis.
Yes.
Sir, so here is Professor Pattanaik, sir. Prasanta Pattanaik, sir. Can you hear us, sir?
Hello, Maurice.
Yes, hello. You
Hello.
can't see me. I think my camera doesn't work. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
How are you?
I am fine. And how are you?
Professor Pattanaik, he said, how are you?
Oh, I am fine. Something is happening. It is interrupting something. I'm fine, Maurice. How are you?
Maurice, we cannot see you.
No, you can't see me because my camera doesn't work.
Ah, I see. But we can hear you, yes.
Let's try.
So, Dr. Pattanaik, sir, may I have your permission to start today's session?
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Respected Professor Dr. Prasanta Pattanaik, dear participants, distinguished guests and speakers, and my dear friends, a very warm good evening to you all. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the third session of the Individual Wellbeing and Social Welfare Study Circle, organized by the Banglar Pathshala Foundation, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Over the past 2 weeks, we have embarked on an extraordinary intellectual journey guided by world-renowned scholars who have enriched our understanding of well-being and justice through the lens of the functioning and capability approach. Tonight, we continue this journey with none other than Professor Dr. Prasanta Pattanaik, whose contributions to welfare economics, social choice theory, and capabilities-based evaluation have inspired generations of scholars worldwide. Professor Pattanaik has been a pioneer in illuminating the philosophical and ethical foundations of welfare economics and is widely recognized for bridging economics with deeper normative concerns of justice, human flourishing. His scholarship has not only sharpened the conceptual tools of the FCA, in short, functioning and capability approach, but also made it more responsive to questions of value diversity and fairness in comparing well-being across individuals and societies. In this session, the title is Some Conceptual Issues in the FCA, Part 1, Diversity of Values and Interpersonal Comparisons of Well-being. Professor Pattanaik will guide us through two of the most challenging yet central questions in welfare analysis. Number one, how we do recognize and respect the diversity of values when assessing well-being. And number two, how can we make meaningful interpersonal comparisons without ignoring ethical pluralism and individual heterogeneity? These issues strike at the very heart of both policymaking and theory building. They determine how societies can evaluate justice, fairness, and collective progress, while still acknowledging the unique aspirations and circumstances of individuals. For a country like Bangladesh, and indeed for many contexts in the global south, these questions are not just academic, but profoundly practical. They affect how we measure poverty, design policies for marginalized, and imagine futures where dignity and fairness are realized for all. On behalf of Banglar Pathshala Foundation, all participants, I wish to express our deep gratitude to Professor Pattanaik for his generosity in sharing his wisdom with us. We are also immensely grateful to all of our participants joining from across the globe, whose commitment and engagement make this study circle a truly vibrant and meaningful space of dialogue. Now I will present a brief introduction of the speaker. Dr. Prasanta Pattanaik is Emeritus Professor of Economics at the University of California, Riverside, USA. The areas of his research include welfare economics and the theory of social choice, stochastic preferences and choice, fuzzy preferences and choice, choice under non-probabilistic uncertainty, and the theory of international trade. He has published numerous papers in academic journals and is author and co-author of several. So with that, I humbly invite Professor Dr. Prasanta Pattanaik, sir, to deliver his lecture. Thank you all.
Thank you, Javed, for your very kind introduction, and my greetings to everybody participating in this session. What I want to do in this lecture is this. As you know very well, the notion of individual well-being, formulated in the functioning capability approach, has extended our knowledge about what constitutes well-being and things like that wonderfully. But at the same time, the approach also raises several basic conceptual issues. I shall discuss one such conceptual issue involving interpersonal comparison of well-being in the functioning and capability approach. Before I come to the details of my discussion, Let me first clarify why the issue of interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being is important from an intuitive point of view, and of course, from an analytical point of view. And that is the first thing I want to discuss, the intuition of it. And also I want to specify the exact framework in which I shall consider the issue. First, consider why one may need to make interpersonal comparisons of well-being, or for that matter, interpersonal comparisons of well-being differences when making policy prescriptions. Suppose the government is thinking of making some important changes in the current economic policies. To judge the social desirability of this change, one of the things that we have to know is whether the policy change will affect favorably or unfavorably the well-being of social groups who before the policy change have some of the lowest well-being levels in the society. However, to know which social groups have the lowest levels of well-being in a social state, we need to have some criterion or method of making interpersonal well-being comparisons, even if that method or criterion happens to be somewhat rough and has a limited range of applications. A little reflections will show that irrespective of whether we accept the conception of individual well-being as the satisfaction of the individual's preferences or the individual's happiness, or whether we choose to follow the functioning and capability approach, we can hardly avoid interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being, or even interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being differences if we are engaged in policy prescriptions or the assessment of a society's welfare. There is, however, one major difference between first interpersonal comparison of individual well-being when individual well-being is identified either as the individual's happiness or desired fulfillment. That is one. And two, interpersonal comparisons of individual well-being in the FCA. It doesn't matter which of these two approaches we are following, we need interpersonal comparisons of well-being. But there's a major difference between the two approaches, whether we are following the utility-based conception in terms of individual happiness or individual's desired fulfillment, or whether we are following the functioning and capability approach. There's a major difference between the two approaches or the two streams. First, notice that the notion of happiness, as well as the notion of preference satisfaction, or any other utility-based concept, refers to a mental state. As Sen in his 1985 monograph rightly observes, each of the two motions has descriptive contents. And it is this descriptive content which allows us to compare, at least in principle, the happiness or preference satisfaction of one person with that of another person. This is about the utility-based concepts. Each of the utility-based concepts of individual well-being, whether it is preference satisfaction or happiness, has a descriptive content to say that I am happier than him or he is happier than me, involves some description. I'm not making a value judgment. Being happier is not a value judgment. It is about a state of mind. Therefore, there is an intuitive content, descriptive content. It is because of this descriptive content that in principle, at least, I can compare the happiness of one person with the happiness of another person. And actually, it is not only in terms of principle. In principle, we can do this in the utility-based approach, but also in practice, we have done this. Psychologists have done this. Repeatedly, psychologists have conducted studies which involve interpersonal comparisons of happiness. The literature is too large, so I won't go into the details of the literature in psychology, but there exists a large literature involving comparison of individual happiness of different individuals and also preference satisfaction. But contrast this with the functioning and capability approach. There, the well-being is the value that is attached to a functioning bundle achieved by someone. The value which either the individual whose well-being we are talking about, or the individual who is assessing the welfare of other individuals. There is a value to be attached to the individual's achievement in terms of the functionings, and that value doesn't have any intuitive content. We do not know what comparison, how to make that comparison, because this value doesn't have any descriptive content. Sorry, the value has an intuitive content, but the value doesn't have any descriptive content, unlike happiness or preference satisfaction. Maybe at some stage, psychologists will be able to provide a descriptive content and therefore a basis for interpersonal comparison. But as far as I know, we do not have a well-developed methodology for assigning any descriptive content to value. And therefore, we don't have even any practical method for measuring this value, the value that I attach to a functioning bundle of an individual. Whether I'm talking about the value of the individual or the value of the person who is evaluating the individual's well-being. This value is a concept which lacks in descriptive content. Therefore, even in principle, we do not know how to compare the value that is attached to one person's well-being under the functioning and capability approach and the value that is attached to another person's well-being in the functioning and capability approach. And when we don't know even in principle what is the intuitive content in terms of description, how do I compare the interpersonally, the value that I'm attaching? So that's the basic issue. Now, if I cannot attach this value, what do I do? Sorry, if I cannot compare this value across individuals, what do I do? Because we know this interpersonal comparison of well-being is absolutely essential for the job of a welfare economist or anybody who is trying to pass some judgment about society's welfare or the comparison of individual well-being. So what do we do? In the absence of this basis for interpersonal comparison, Sen acknowledged that explicitly, that we cannot directly compare interpersonal well-being comparisons in the functioning and capability approach on the basis of any descriptive content. But then he suggested some plausible convention which seems to us at least intuitively plausible, so that I can make some comparison. I don't have any firm basis, but at least I have a useful convention or comparison. So what is the criterion that Sen proposed? Sen proposed what is called a dominance-based criterion. Now, Sen has repeatedly proposed this dominance-based criterion in different contexts, in other contexts also, but in this context, the criterion that he suggested is the following. Suppose I am comparing the well-being of two persons, call them I and E. So I and E are two different persons. I'm comparing their well-being in the functioning and capability approach. The convention or plausible axiom that is suggested is the following. Suppose X is a bigger bundle than Y, bigger in the following sense. X has some more of some functioning and no less of any functioning. So some functioning bundle for individual I and individual E, which I'm talking about X and Y, X has more of some functioning and no less of any functioning as compared to Y. So X, intuitively speaking, is a bigger bundle than Y. There is no ambiguity about this notion of being bigger, because one functioning it contains in larger quantity and no functioning it contains in smaller quantity. In that sense, it's a bigger bundle. Then Sen suggested that any individual, whether it is I or E, if he has the bigger bundle X, has a higher level of well-being than the individual who has a smaller bundle that is Y. So between two individuals, say 1 and 2, if one has more of some functioning and no less of any other functioning as compared to individual 2, then Y is better off in terms of well-being as compared to 2. So that's the criterion he suggested. On the face of it, looks very plausible because in the functioning approach, the achieved functionings are being considered. And if one functioning bundle is bigger in this sense, then there is no reason to doubt, at least intuitively, that individual 1 should be better off with X as compared to individual 2 with the functioning bundle Y. So that's the criterion that he proposed. Now the question is, how far does this criterion take us? There are two. First, initially, I want to note two limitations, which I presume would agree. One limitation is, underlying the criterion is the following assumption, that the set of functioning that I'm considering is the same for individual 1 as for individual 2. In other words, in sense language, the doings and beings that individual 1 values, the set of these doings and beings is exactly the same as the set of doings and beings that the individual 2 values. I shall come back to this later on. This is, of course, a restrictive assumption, but much of the work has been done in this framework. So naturally, Sen adopted that framework. The second assumption that underlies this is the following, that when I'm comparing these two on the basis of the dominance principle, what are the implications? Now, we had not considered this implication at an earlier stage of the development of the subject, but subsequently people raised issues about this. What are the implications of these highly plausible assumptions? So in this lecture, I want to present one result in particular. That result is due to Professor Young-Seng Shu, who is here, and me. We published that paper in Oxford Economic Papers in 2007. And that's the one I put in the reading list. But there are also other people who have worked on that, though not exactly in the way in which we did. People including Mark Flerway and Brun and Tongoden. They have also worked in that framework, but exactly not in this way, the way we did. And so I am presenting only one result, that is due to Professor Su and me. First, now this is about the intuition, that what I'm trying to do, the implications of this axiom of Sen, that a bigger bundle offers any individual a higher well-being, level of well-being as compared to any individual with a smaller bundle. Now then let me specify the exact framework which I shall use. In the context of the functioning and capability approach, there are at least three frameworks one can think of. First, one can make the simplifying assumption that individual well-being depends only on the achieved functioning bundle of an individual, nothing else. Only the achieved functioning bundle. The individual may have several possible functioning bundles that he can achieve, but actually achieved functioning bundle is X for 1, and achieved functioning bundle is Y for individual 2. Now, these are the only things that matter for the two individuals' respective well-being. So we are not considering another important concept here, the notion of freedom, because in Sen's approach that he explicitly has advocated, not only individuals' achieved functioning bundle matters, but also the two individuals' freedom that they enjoyed. And freedom he conceived as being reflected in a set of functioning bundles, all of which are available to the individual, and he can pick up any bundle out of that set at will. So he conceived freedom in that sense. There are reservations about that notion of freedom, but for the moment, let me ignore that notion of those reservations. Let us consider that freedom. So Sen assumed that the individual's well-being depends on the achieved functioning bundle and also freedom. Now, that is the second framework that we can think of. And of course, we can think of another framework where individual well-being depends only on freedom, not on the actually achieved functioning bundle. So one approach is it depends only on the actually achieved functioning bundle. The second is it depends only on the functioning bundle and freedom and nothing else. And the third is it depends on both freedom and the achieved functioning bundle. Now, what I'm going to discuss that is applicable to all the three approaches, but for simplicity, I shall concentrate only on the approach where we are concentrating on the achieved functioning bundle, so that we are assuming that the individual's well-being depends exclusively on the individual's achieved functioning bundle. The other two cases that I've discussed, I shall completely ignore. So let me take up the problem in this particular framework, concentrating only on the achieved functioning bundle. Now then, I need a little bit of notation. And I understand there may be students here who may not be very comfortable with notation, but the notation is very simple, and I shall go through it slowly, so that if there is anybody who is not familiar with this sort of notation or this sort of reasoning, you can pick it up from my explanation. So first, we need a notation for the functionings. What are the functionings, or as Sen called them, the doings and beings which people value, like being well-nourished, being adequately sheltered from the elements, being healthy, and things like that. These are the doings and beings, and the list can go on depending on what you consider to be valuable functioning, and the list can go on. But these are the examples of doings and beings which are valued by individuals, and Sen calls them functionings. Now, if you want to draw an analogy, those who have a background in those participants who have a background in economics, you can think of the utility analysis, where utility is assumed to be a function of the commodity bundles that the individual achieves. Now here we don't have a commodity bundle notion, we have the notion of a bundle of functionings. So there are, suppose, n different functionings. Corresponding to each functioning, there is a quantity of a function, that functioning. So that will give you how much of that functioning that individual has achieved. So a functioning bundle is essentially a specification of a quantity for each of the functionings, so that it specifies how much of shelter I have achieved, properly shelter, how much of good nourishment I have achieved, and things like that. So a functioning bundle is simply a vector of quantities, a quantity for each of the functionings. And I shall assume that these functionings can be measured, and they are measured along an interval. And the interval goes from 0 to some finite quantities. So suppose the being well-nourished is cardinally measurable, and the amount of functioning, that functioning goes from 0 to some finite number, say 100. Similarly for shelter, and similarly for any other functioning that you can think of. Now, the society has a finite number of individuals and at least 2 individuals. So it has at least 2 individuals, but the number is finite. Now, then I bring in my concept of evaluator of well-being. I'm assuming that there is an evaluator which is evaluating the individual well-being levels. So this you can think of, if you like, as the economist who is evaluating the functioning bundles of different individuals and considering who is better off, who is worse off. Or if you like, you can consider any individuals in the society who is judging the welfare or well-being of the different individuals. So this is the notion of an evaluator of individual well-being. Then I would introduce the following notation. Suppose I and E are 2 different individuals. I is one individual and E is another individual. And suppose X and Y are any 2 different functioning bundles. Then I introduce a notion curly greater than or equal to. I'm saying curly because if I use standard notation of greater than or equal to, that may be confused with our standard notion. So that's why I've taken the counterpart of standard greater than or equal to and converted that into curly greater than or equal to. So if I say I comma X stands in that relation curly greater than or equal to E comma Y, what I mean is individual I's well-being when X is the achieved functioning bundle of I is at least as high as individual E's well-being when individual E has the functioning bundle Y. Remember, I have made the assumption individual well-being depends only on the achieved functioning bundle. So the individual who is comparing the well-being of the two individuals, I and E, it may be any individuals in the society, or it may be the economist, or whoever you like. So he is ranking I, X and E, Y in terms of well-being. So if I write I, X is greater than or equal to E, Y, that can be interpreted as saying that the evaluator of individual well-being considers I's well-being to be at least as high as E's well-being with Y. If I has X and E has Y, then if I write E, X, or sorry, I, X is greater than or equal to E, Y, that is to be understood as I's well-being when I's achieved functioning bundle is X is at least as high as E's well-being when E's well-being bundle is Y. Now, I may be going too slow, but I don't want to proceed through very fast because I have been told that, okay, some of the students may not have a background in economics or philosophy. So I don't want them to get excluded. So others would kindly excuse me. Now then, corresponding to this greater than or equal to relation, there is also a greater than relation. Just as in the case of numbers, greater than or equal to is, this number is greater than or equal to that number, corresponding to that, the notion is this number is greater than another number. Similarly, here also, I introduced the notion of greater than. If I write I, X is greater than E, Y, by that I mean the evaluator of individual well-being considers the well-being of I when I enjoys or I has achieved the functioning bundle X to be strictly greater than E well-being when E has the achieved functioning bundle Y. So one way of saying that I, X is greater than E, Y, if and only if I, X is greater than or equal to E, Y, but the other way around is not true. EY is not at least as great as IX. So if I say a number X is greater than a number Y, what do I mean by that? X is greater than or equal to Y, but Y is not greater than or equal to X, which means X is greater than Y. So this is exactly analogous to that. That I, X is greater than or equal to E, Y, if and only if IX is greater than equal to E, Y, but the other way around it is not true. E, Y is not greater than or equal to I, X. Okay. Now, so I, X greater than E, Y is to be interpreted as saying that the evaluator of individual well-being considers I's well-being when I's functioning bundle is X is greater than E's well-being when E's functioning bundle is Y. Now, if the notation is clear, then I would now go over to some assumptions. Now, what I'm trying to do here, actually, when I'm saying I, is in each case I should say Professor Young-Seng Shu and I, because this is strictly based on our joint work. But for convenience in the lecture, I shall say I. It is not any thing like megalomania. I'm just trying to make it brief. Okay, so what I shall do, I shall make this assumption of Sen that anybody who has a bigger bundle than anybody else who has a smaller bundle, then the first person has a higher level of well-being as compared to the small other person. Now, what I'm going to take this assumption and then combine it with some other very plausible assumptions. Each of them looks plausible, but when sense axiom is being added to those other plausible axioms, the result is an impossibility result. The result says there is no way in which you can satisfy all the four axioms. And if you satisfy any three of the axioms, the fourth one will be necessarily violated. Now, out of all four axioms, I consider this dominance axiom to be the least plausible assumption. Why I consider that, I shall come to that. But first, let me introduce the assumptions. The first assumption is a very standard one, throughout economics we use in different contexts, and I'm introducing that assumption here. The first assumption has two parts. The first part is very trivial. If anybody doesn't satisfy that assumption, you may have reason to think that, okay, he has some peculiarity about his thinking. The first part is the following of assumption one. It says, this greater than equal to relation with reference to well-being is reflexive. For every individual I and every functioning bundle X, individual I's well-being when he has X is greater than equal to individual I's well-being when he has X. Now, this is as trivial as saying that if I'm talking about at least as tall as, that individual 1 is at least as tall as himself, individual 2 is at least as tall as himself, you would consider all these statements rather trivial. In this case, this is also trivial in that intuitive sense, that this greater than equal to relation is reflexive, that everybody's well-being, when that person has X, is greater than equal to that person's well-being when he has X. It is anybody who violates that assumption, any evaluator of individual well-being, one would worry about his way of thinking. Now, the second part is not that trivial. The second part is intuitively non-trivial. What it says is that the relations should be transitive. Consider any three individuals, individual I, individual E, and individual K. Now, suppose I has functioning bundle X, E has functioning bundle Y, and K has functioning bundle Z. Now, then this assumption says if individual I's well-being with X, if, I'm not saying it will necessarily be so, that he will have X, but if individual I has functioning bundle X, then his well-being will be at least as great as, suppose it is at least as great as individual E with functioning bundle Y. And if, again, individual E has functioning bundle Y, his well-being is at least as great as individual K's well-being with Z, then I's well-being with X will be greater than equal to K's well-being with Z. It is analogous to saying, if a number X is greater than equal to Y, and the number Y is greater than equal to Z, then X should be greater than equal to Z. In the case of numbers, it's fairly obvious, but we are saying that in the case of well-being comparisons, also similar property holds. If I's well-being with X is greater than equal to E's well-being with Y, and E's well-being with Y is greater than equal to K's well-being with Z, then I's well-being with X will be greater than equal to K's well-being with Z. Now, this is not entirely obvious, at least in the case of positive economics, non-normative economics. This sort of assumption need not necessarily be true. Because sometimes people do violate this type of assumption, transitivity. But in the case of normative economics or normative exercise of welfare judgments, this seems to be a very compelling assumption. In fact, we can do even with a less compelling assumption, more compelling assumption than this, but for convenience, I have used this assumption of transitivity. The next assumption is crucial. Transitivity is widely accepted, but assumption 2, that's crucial for our purpose. Therefore, I want to take a bit of time to explain that assumption. Now, interpersonal comparison of individual well-being, we know that individuals have different values. Even social groups have different values. In a reasonably large society, there are significant social groups will have different set of values. And even within a, intuitively speaking, a homogeneous group, there are still individual differences. So there is a lot of diversity of values in real life. Now the question can be asked, in the presence of this diversity, will it be reasonable for the society or for anybody who is evaluating individual well-being? Will it be reasonable to say that I shall evaluate all these different individuals' well-being on the basis of the same set of values, absolutely the same set. To me, it seems it would be a very poor assumption to make. First, from the positive point of view, people don't do that. People feel the necessity to acknowledge this diversity. Second, from the normative point of view, what justification can be there to evaluate everybody's well-being on the basis of same set of values? Now, think about a society where there are people who are deeply religious. There are other people who are not religious at all. They are completely agnostic about religion and existence of God and things like that. Now, is there any reason why we shall evaluate everybody's well-being on the basis of the same set of values, whether the values are agnostic or the values are based on religion? Should we evaluate everybody's well-being on the basis of the same set of values with respect to religion? Or consider another example, which is less extreme. Now, recently there has been this movement, which may be called minimalist movement, that more is not necessarily better, that we should try to live a simple life, that a simple life may be more valuable in many ways than a more complicated life where we are trying to achieve more and more. Now, this way of thinking, which has considerable amount of following, it is not still a majority of individuals who think this way, but this is, I think, a valuable thing, that some people are rethinking the notion of well-being. Does it depend on achieving more and more, whether it is more of nourishment, or whether it is more of shelter, better and better shelter, or anything that you like, or we should try to live a reasonably simple life. It's a valuable method of looking at life. Now, should we then force everybody to be evaluated on the basis of same set of values, that we shall evaluate everybody's well-being on the basis of the same set of values? Now, you may say that, okay, even if everybody doesn't have the same set of values, why not use the majority's values? Suppose in the society, there's a large group, a dominant group in terms of numbers, so that we can say, okay, there is some sort of consensus within that dominant group. Why don't we use the values of that dominant group to evaluate the well-being of everybody else? Do you really want to do this? These are the questions I'm asking. Do you really want to do this? Look at the values of the dominant group and then use the same values to evaluate the well-being of everybody. Consider any reasonably complex society, whether you are calling, whether it is India or it is Bangladesh or the United States of America. Would you like to take the majority's value necessarily, or the values on the basis of which everybody's well-being must be assessed? So that if anybody who is assessing his own well-being, or whether somebody else is assessing that his own well-being on the different set of values, you will say that he is unreasonable, that his well-being should be assessed on the basis of the same set of values. Think in this context, a lot of things which have been considered valuable over time, they have been valuable because people thought about it differently from their contemporaries, other contemporaries. Consider somebody like, what example should I choose? Okay, consider Tolstoy, or for that matter, Gandhi. We know that these were extremely rare individuals, but should their well-being necessarily be assessed on the value of their contemporaries just because they're individuals and not a huge group? Or consider, for that matter, the well-being of one of the minimalist living pioneers, David Henry Thoreau, or is it Henry David Thoreau? Thoreau, I am forgetting which initial comes first. Thoreau in the 19th century. Now, he thought of a minimalist way of living to be very valuable. At that time, nobody thought like this, or I shouldn't say nobody, very few people thought like him. But gradually over time, now there is a significant group of people who are thinking like him. So should we then assume that everybody's, including Thoreau's well-being, should be evaluated on the basis of the same set of values as his contemporaries in New England in the 19th century? It is difficult to subscribe to this sort of uniform evaluation. It seems like completely denying the values of individuals or minority groups. And there are dangers too. Once you start attaching this sort of sanctity to the majority value and completely ignore the minority values, then it becomes more like a majoritarian government rather than a liberal democracy. A liberal democracy goes by the ultimately its questions will be decided on the basis of the value of the majority. But then we also recognize certain rights for the individuals, which the simple majority cannot overcome. We enshrine these rights, whether you call them the right to freedom of religion or the right to choose a particular way of life, minimalist way of life. We recognize these rights as legitimate individual rights in the Constitution, so that in order to change these rights, you require a special method, not the standard majority principle. Standard majority principle will give you just a simple majority rule, which can sometimes be a majoritarian rule, but not necessarily a liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is something quite radically different from majoritarian rule. A majoritarian rule just counts up the numbers. It doesn't consider what are the numbers being used for. It doesn't consider, okay, are there other values which can be equally sacred, like the values of the majority? It doesn't consider that. It just counts up the numbers. It doesn't consider the right to religion, the right to believe in a particular way of life, which is not necessarily unreasonable. These sort of rights it doesn't recognize. In fact, one can conform to the opinion of the majority, stick to the majority opinion, and violate every conceivable other aspect of liberal democracy. And you can find plenty of examples from all over the world where ostensibly the country is following a strict majority rule, but ignoring the individual rights. So should we necessarily ignore the individual rights and not give them any consideration? Or should we incorporate some protection for group rights, social groups' rights, or individual rights like that? Again, in India, there is a wide range of different values in different groups. There is a large tribal population. In my state in India, the tribal population amounts to as much as 20%. Now, they have a different set of beliefs. And if you go by simple majority rule, their interest will not be protected at all. Their rights will not be protected at all if you just go by the majority. So the Indian Constitution introduces some special rights. You cannot take away those rights without amending the Constitution. And the Constitution cannot be amended without a special procedure. I forget exactly the majority that is required. I think it is 2/3 majority and some very strict procedure. So it is recognized the sanctity of group rights and individual rights. When I said my country, I was referring to India, the country where I was born, but my subsequent country where I'm citizen, same thing is true. There are certain rights which are granted by the Constitution. You cannot amend those rights by simple majority. The extremely complicated majorities have to be used in order to amend those rights. It can be amended, but with a lot of difficulty. So should we necessarily ignore all the special rights of individuals and groups? Therefore, just appealing to the majority opinion doesn't seem very attractive to me and I believe, to many other people. So that's not a solution that we shall say we shall go by the majority opinion. Therefore, we have solved the problem. I can take the majority's value, and that will give you whatever the majority is dictating. That will give me a single set of standards by which I shall evaluate everybody's well-being. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this context of this assumption. That provides the motivation for this assumption, which is the following. There exist at least two individuals, distinct individuals, I and E, and at least two distinct functioning bundles X and Y, such that IX is greater than IY and EY is greater than EX. What it is saying, now at least there are two individuals, I and E, there may be many more individuals, and there are at least two functioning bundles X and Y. There may be many more functioning bundles like this, but at least two, such that the person who is evaluating individual well-being, he considers I's well-being from X to be strictly greater than I's well-being from Y, but for E's well-being from Y, it is greater than E's well-being from X. In other words, he is recognizing there is some difference between these two individuals. Their values may be different. Therefore, how do I evaluate both these individuals' well-being on the basis of same set of standards? He doesn't. That's why somewhere you'll find that he will like to evaluate I's well-being from X to be higher than E's well-being from Y, but E's well-being from Y to be higher than I's well-being from X. He's recognizing that there's a big difference between these two individual values, or the individual values of two groups, social groups, to which these two individuals belong respectively. And therefore, he's trying to make some difference in his evaluation of the two individuals' well-being from the two functioning bundles X and Y. For I and X, he will consider I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y. And when it comes to E's well-being from Y to be higher than E's well-being from X. Anybody who doesn't believe in just following one strict standard set of standards to evaluate everybody's well-being will satisfy this assumption. Normally can be expected to satisfy this assumption. Then I go over to assumption 3. The assumption 3 is simply sense assumption, dominance. If X is a bigger bundle than Y, in the sense of containing more of some functioning and no less of any other functioning, then anybody who has the bigger bundle has a higher level of well-being as compared to anybody who has a smaller bundle. Now here we are not appealing to individual differences. The intuition is coming completely outside the functioning and capability approach. We are recognizing that there is no direct way of comparing the well-being of two different individuals in this approach. Therefore, we are trying to introduce some convention that doesn't it sound plausible? That's the question we are asking. And Sen asked, doesn't it sound plausible? If it is plausible, then why won't you adopt this assumption that anybody who has a bigger bundle has a higher level of well-being as compared to anybody else who has a smaller bundle? So that's sense dominance assumption. The last assumption is assumption 4. Now, this is again very familiar in economic theory. Let me state the assumption. Suppose, and this assumption has nothing to do with interpersonal comparison of well-being. This assumption strictly confines to single individual's well-being comparison. Suppose we are considering I's well-being in alternative situations. There is no other person who is involved here. A given individual's well-being with alternative functioning bundles. Now, suppose we find the individual evaluator, the person who is evaluating individual well-being, suppose we find that he considers I's well-being from I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y. Now, if he considers I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y, then suppose Z is a well-being which is very, very close to X. Arbitrarily close, as close as you like. But it's not the same as either X or Y. It is very close to X. Then the assumption is saying, if I's well-being from X is considered to be higher than I's well-being from Y, and Z is very close to X, then I's well-being from Z should be considered to be higher than I's well-being from Y. It is counterpart of the standard assumption that we use all over consumer theory in the economics, that if the individual, there it is being used as a positive axiom without a normative content, that if somebody considers X to be better than Y for him, then anything which is arbitrarily close to X should be considered better by him to Y. Here we are not talking about a given individual's value judgment, but we are saying that the individual's value judgment is being judged by a person, an evaluator of individual well-being. If the individual well-being is being evaluated to be higher than individual's well-being from Y, then anything which is close to X, any functioning bundle, I's well-being from X should be considered to be higher than I's well-being from Y. The other way around also. If the evaluator of individual well-being considers I's well-being from Y to be higher than I's well-being from X, then, I'm sorry, let me go back. If individual I's well-being from X is considered to be higher than individual's I's well-being from Y, and if Z is a well-being which is arbitrarily close to Y, then I's well-being from X should be considered to be higher than I's well-being from Y. Let me repeat. The evaluator of individual well-being considers I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y. Now, suppose Z is a bundle, functioning bundle, which is very close to X, then the evaluator must consider I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y, and also I's well-being from Z. Again, speaking wrongly, though I'm looking at the right notation, I's well-being from X is higher than I's well-being from Y, then any functioning bundle Z which is very close to X, I's well-being from that Z must be higher than I's well-being from Y. Similarly, if I's well-being from X is higher than I's well-being from Y, then any functioning bundle Z which is very close to Y, I's well-being from X must be considered to be higher than I's well-being from Z. This is called the assumption of continuity. This seems intuitively fairly straightforward. That intuitively what it means, your well-being comparison doesn't take any jump. If you are considering I's well-being from X to be higher than I's well-being from Y, then Z is very close to X, arbitrarily close, then you should also consider I's well-being from Z to be higher than I's well-being from Y. That's what it's asserting. It is an assumption that we use all the time in standard economic theory, and I'm making that assumption. Now, out of these assumptions, let me sort of indicate my own personal inclination. Assumption 1 is reflexivity and transitivity. Assumption 2 is minimal relativism, recognizing some autonomy for the individuals where their values are sovereign. Then sense dominance assumption, and finally this continuity assumption. Continuity assumption I consider to be basically technical assumption. The other three are more substantive assumptions. I find dominance to be the least plausible from my point of view. I shall come back to this again. Now the question is, what happens if we make all those four assumptions? Here comes a proposition, which is a slight variant of a proposition that Professor Su and I proved. Now the proposition which I'm putting here is the following. The greater than equal to relation for well-being comparisons cannot satisfy the four assumptions simultaneously. In other words, you are bound to violate one of the assumptions, at least one, possibly more. Suppose you say that the greater than equal to relation for well-being comparison satisfy the first three assumptions, that transitivity assumption, minimal relativism, and dominance, then you are bound to violate continuity assumption. If it satisfies the last three assumptions, then you are bound to violate the first assumption. In the first case of first assumption, you will particularly will violate transitivity. Now, what's the significance of this? The significance of this, when you are faced with an impossible result like this, and later on, there will be a lecture on, Professor Rajat Dev will give a lecture on Arrow's impossibility theorem, where not exactly similar, but in a different context, an impossibility theorem is proved, which says that certain relation cannot satisfy 4 axioms or 5 axioms. What is the significance of this result, this sort of result, negative result? You have to look at which assumption you are least likely to go by, which is from your point of view, least intuitive assumption. Sorry, I have put a question mark somewhere. There was a message for me, drop your question mark.
Sir, the message, that is a message to all the participants. If they have a question, they can ask it. That is for all the participants, not for you.
Oh, I see.
Sorry
I
for
thought
any
I have
confusion.
put a question
Yeah.
like a mistake. As you
No, no.
probably know, my knowledge of this technology is minimal. So I thought I have put a question mark somewhere. It is coming up as a question mark. But maybe if there is a question here, maybe I should take. I'm not running short of time. So
Yeah.
it is 9 a.m. We
Yeah.
have
So,
half an hour. Maybe if there is any
yeah.
technical question about that, I can take it here. Or shall I go on and finish the lecture and then I shall take the question? Maybe.
Yeah, there is no question posted yet, sir. So, sir, please feel free to continue with your lecture.
Okay. Okay. So whenever you are faced with this sort of negative result or impossibility result, which says something cannot be done on certain assumptions, one has to look at the assumptions. Where do you think there is vulnerability of the assumption? Which assumption is least acceptable? That is the case in positive economics, also in normative economics or welfare economics. Which of these four assumptions is least acceptable? Now, if I am asked that question, my choice should be, from my value point, the assumption would be the assumption of dominance. Now, I shall briefly indicate the reason for my choosing that. I would, under no circumstance, I would be, on the basis of my values, I would consider the minimal relativism is a strong assumption. It's a very weak assumption from the ethical point of view. Evaluating everybody's well-being in the society by the same set of criteria, no matter how much they differ, no matter how the social cultural background differs, I would find it extremely unacceptable. Whereas in the case of assumption of dominance, I can think of reason why I would like to relax that. The dominance assumption, the reason I would like to relax that is the following. Consider the counterpart of that assumption in the case of individual preferences. The counterpart of that assumption is that preference should not take a jump. Bigger bundle is not necessarily better than a smaller bundle, irrespective of the individuals. Now consider the following. In the context of utility theory, would we be prepared to say that anybody who has a bigger bundle has a higher level of preference satisfaction as compared to anybody who has a smaller bundle? For the given individual, that's fine. If I'm comparing two bundles, one bundle is a bigger commodity bundle and another is a smaller commodity bundle, then in the context of consumer theory, I would be anytime willing to accept that anybody who has a bigger bundle has a higher level of well-being as compared to if he had a smaller bundle. I would like to accept that. But here we are not talking about comparing for the same individual. We are talking across individuals. Consider what will happen in the utility theory. Would we say that anybody who has a bigger bundle has a higher level of utility as compared to anybody who has a smaller bundle? Not necessarily. Our utility functions may be different. Similarly here, saying that anybody who has a bigger bundle has a higher level of well-being in terms of value attached as compared to anybody who has a smaller bundle, anybody else, it doesn't seem plausible because the functions with which you are evaluating their well-being may be different. Suppose I'm considering only two functionings, health and education. Now consider a person who evaluates health a little more as compared to education, gives greater weight, a person who gives a little greater weight to education as compared to health. We don't think that these evaluations, this weighting system is completely bizarre or it shouldn't be allowed. We permit that. But anybody who attaches a greater weight to health, you will presumably evaluate a bundle which has more health as compared to anybody who has a bigger bundle in terms of education. So we don't consider that necessarily to be applicable here when we are comparing across individuals. What is very plausible in the context of a consumer theory may become less plausible here because I'm arguing for minimal relativism, that I have to consider somewhere the difference of individual values. So that's why I would pick up this dominance assumption as the least plausible assumption from my point of view. So I think I should stop here. I have gone beyond my point. Or I have more time? Do I have more time?
Yes, yes, sir. We have you can take 10 more minutes, 5 to 10.
Okay. Okay. So I would like to just go over to another related issue. Okay, we proved this result in this context. Now, this result could have been proved with an assumption which is even weaker than transitivity, this sort of result. And we have that type of result in that paper by Professor Chu and me. Now, I would like to mention that the same sort of negative result can be proved if we consider other frameworks. Here, we are considering that the individual well-being is being determined only by the individual's achieved functioning boundary. Exactly similar sort of result, negative result, can be proved if you assume that individual's well-being is determined only exclusively by the individual's freedom. That is the set of functioning boundaries in sense case from which the individual can choose any functioning boundary. Exactly same negative result, basically, because it's a different framework, can be proved. Also, exactly similar result can be proved with a completely general case where individual's well-being depends on individuals' achieved functioning boundary and freedom also. Now, having said that, I would like to add just one more remark, and I shall stop there. Now, when I am saying it can be proved in the context of freedom also, for the time being, at least I'm accepting Sen's notion of freedom. But then, as I guess Professor Chu will explain in his lecture, there are reasons to worry about those notion of freedom that Professor Sen used. There are notions to worry about that because it causes some certain difficulties. So I'm taking it for granted that we accept that freedom notion, sense freedom notion, and then on the basis of that I've discussed. But that doesn't necessarily imply that I'm accepting that notion of freedom. Okay, I shall stop there.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful presentation. And I personally enjoyed it thoroughly. And the fear that if you use any of the equation or any of the symbolic language, then audience will withdraw. But the thing is, at the beginning, we started. There are more audiences join today than at what you have begin today. So so I think this is very clearly explained here that how we could coexist with different values believing persons or individuals and their choices. So I think Professor Pattanaik will take some rest for 5 to 7 minutes, and then within 5 to 7 minutes after, we will start our question answer session. By the time, you can give me some suggestion that how we can be more effective in our question answer session. Should we only take in the chat box written question, or just unmute and say some verbal questions? So thank you. And Professor Maurice Saleh, Professor Sue, and Professor Rajat Dev, thank you again for joining us. And people actually demanded that all the lectures have to be lectures have to be uploaded on the YouTube so that they can hear again and again. So I think the Professor Maurice Saleh, would you like to say something or just any comment? Please unmute and then please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Right.
No, I am using my phone.
Okay. Okay. So is the audio is clear and the lecture is sound was clear? You can hear Professor Pattanaik's lecture.
Yes, it was very clear.
Yes. So your lecture is coming up. Right. So here we took since there is a good number of proportion of non-economics background participants. So we were afraid of avoiding some technical terms. So, but at some point, Professor Pattanaik introduced it. I think these are very simple things, and people do not have any problem sharing those ideas. So in 5 minutes we will start question answer session, sir. So if you have time, you can stay with us.
Okay, I have some time, yes.
Yeah. Oh, that is wonderful. That is so Professor Su, can you hear me? Su?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
All right. So audio sound was clear and
Yeah, it was very clear on my side, and I understood everything that Professor Pattanaik said. So I'm very happy.
yeah. And the reason I actually shared with you Professor Pattanaik's lecture, one is his lecture and his way of presentation is very interesting, and particularly our participants liked his presentation very much. That is one. And second, um, uh, uh, actually, uh, um, actually, it is very. I'm very delighted that you have joined this session, because the fourth session, the next session, will be taken by you. So you can, so that you can have an idea how um, our audiences, our present participants are interacting and things like that, and how we are operating.
It is great to be here actually, and it gave me lots of ideas about how I should prepare my slides. And so once I have one, I will send to you. But I think I can share, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Professor Rajat Dev, sir, would you like to?
Well, Roy, I have been attending these talks and I'm very impressed, excepting now I know that I have to completely revise. My work is how should I say, much more technical. So I'm going to work on removing all the symbolic logic, all the equations from it, and I will send you a completely revised reading list.
Right.
So that I can't with symbols. I cannot do anything even closely resembling what Professor Pattanaik does. So I will just remove everything and replace them with words.
Certainly, sir, as you like. And I think with that note, we are Professor Patnaik. Uh, can we start the Q&A session
Sure.
now?
Can
Or
I just make one comment on Professor Rajadev's comment
yes.
before you start the questions? I would like to mention there is a paper in Econometrica, one of the most prestigious journals in the profession. The paper is by Professor Rajat and the late Professor Julian Blau. That paper is a model of how you can write absolutely pure mathematical economics without using much symbol. And not only I consider that paper to be a model, I wish I could write like that. What a whole lot of other people share my opinion about that paper. It's rigorous mathematics with a minimal amount of symbols. If I could sometime write like that, I would consider myself to be lucky.
Yes, certainly. I haven't read that paper, but I can have the vibe what you have said. So let's start. Let's start today's Q&A session. So the first question certainly from Glasgow University, Altaf Russell. My friend Altaf Russell.
Thank you. Actually, that was a nice presentation.
Russell bhai, your sound is not clear. Can you just make an adjustment of your sound?
Can you hear me?
Hello? Now this is clear. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, okay. This is actually our problem. Sometimes we can't understand some part, but however, we can understand. It was nice presentation. So thank you for that. And actually, my question is directly maybe related, not to your presentation, but I was summarizing Amartya Sen's book, Development is Freedom. I would like to I would like to raise 2 points from his book. Actually, in page number 52, I was reading his argument. We all know that he argued about democracy and political incentives, saying that no substantial famine has ever occurred in democratic country. In page number 66, he is arguing the uncompromising priority of libertarian rights, saying he cited his another book, Poverty and Famine, saying that even gigantic famine can result without anyone's libertarian rights being violated. In that case, actually, I'm trying to understand these 2 points together. Actually, that in at one point, he's saying no substantial famine can ever occur in a democratic country. At another point, he is arguing that even gigantic famine can result without anyone's libertarian right being violated. So actually, this is my problem. I'm again saying this is my problem to understand these 2 points together. So if you would like to, I would request you to say something about these 2 points.
I have not followed the first point. Can you kindly repeat the first point? I
The
didn't get that.
first point is no substantial. We all know that he argued that no substantial famine has ever occurred in a democratic country, no matter how poor. Right. So this is his, his famous argument. And another point, the second point is about uncompromising priority of libertarian right.
Let me respond to the second question first. Now, when I'm saying that some consideration must be given to difference in values, I'm not saying that we should necessarily, in evaluating an individual's well-being, we should necessarily go by that individual's values completely without any modification so far as his well-being is concerned. In other words, I'm not arguing that if I am evaluating individualized well-being, individualized some individual in the society, I must necessarily go by individualized values. I may like to go by that sometime. Some other time, I may not like to go by that, depending on the context. I'm saying in some context, I should take that into account. I'm not saying that in every context, I must conform to individualized values in evaluating individualized well-being. I'm saying in some context, when there is nothing objectionable from my point of view in individualized values, why won't I accept that? Consider the following simple example. I was giving the example of two individuals. One who likes to live a much simpler life, simpler in terms of our contemporary standards, and the other where he is living a more complex life, but which is probably more in conformity to the contemporary standards. Is there any reason why I would object to his values in evaluating his well-being? He's not starving himself to death or anything like that. I'm saying that he has more modest standards as compared to the other people. So if he tries to live that sort of life, why would I object to that? So I'm not necessarily saying you should always go by an individual's so-called right to have his values to be considered. In some cases, I may ignore it. In some cases, I would accept it. What I'm objecting to is the following value judgment, that whenever I am evaluating individuals' well-being and I'm making interpersonal comparison of well-being, I must evaluate everybody's well-being by the same set of standards. I'm not advocating that I must conform to that individual's well-being when I'm evaluating his standard and a different set of values for the other individual when I'm evaluating his well-being. I'm saying in some cases, I must be prepared to give some concession to the difference in values. And that is from not only from an ethical point of view, I think ethical point of view, I find it very compelling, minimal relativism, but also from the pragmatic point of view. Many countries have stopped becoming a country because of this complete intolerance, that I shall evaluate everybody's well-being in terms of the same set of values that the majority subscribes to. If you do that, then in many countries where there are significant minorities, the countries may split into two countries because the minority may find it completely unacceptable. There will be civil conflict and the society can get divided into two countries or two societies. So some amount of tolerance is necessary in a society, tolerance of minority values. Some minority values must be taken as sacred. Sacred in the following sense: they can be changed, but they can be changed by changing the constitution, where these values are given a special place. I'm not saying these are for all time written in stone. You may change them, but not change them by this simple consensus in the society. There is a large group, they believe this, therefore in every respect, I shall respect this large group's opinion. There must be something more sacred than just a simple majority's opinion or a large group's opinion. And these so-called quote-unquote sacred things are being written into the constitution. It depends on the society. In one country, you may consider these to be particularly sacred. In another country, you may think different things to be completely sacred. So you may like to give them separate status in the constitution. But some distinction like this must be made. If you rule out any possibility of accommodating minority views, that sometimes leads to disasters.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Actually, I was trying to understand actually deprivation of other types. He is arguing deprivation of other types can coexist with all libertarian right, being only satisfied. On that point, I was thinking how this is similar to how this is in the same path, saying no substantial famine has occurred in the democratic country. Actually, I'm trying to understand this, whether how this goes in the same direction. Deprivation of other types can coexist with all libertarian right. I'm trying to understand how this works in the same line. No substantial famine can coexist, have ever occurred in the democratic country.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just make one more comment about democracy?
Yes. Sure, sir.
The thing is, sometimes it is assumed or taken for granted or made an excuse that because the country is a poor country, we can dispense with democracy. It is not an adequate justification, because converting a poor country into a poor country which has a dictator doesn't help very much about that's poverty. People can not only lose their rights, but also they can lose their political freedom. So poverty and democracy can exist together. They can exist separately. There is no necessary connection. There is another notion sometimes that in a democratic country, extreme poverty, like famine, doesn't take place. It depends. In a democratic country, suppose there's a social group which doesn't have much of political crowd. Just because you have democracy, it doesn't mean their basic needs will be necessarily met. Let me give an example. In the 1960s, early 70s, a particular area of my state in India, I was still at that time Indian citizen, so I can refer to my state at that stage. So a particular area in my state was desperately poor. They used to have famine regularly. Democracy was there, but it was famine in the sense of starvation. Death by starvation used to take place. That is because the group was so small that their voting powers were negligible. They were not educated, they were not powerful, therefore it was ignored that there is famine and therefore we need to do something. That didn't happen. That doesn't mean that if we remove democracy, there will be no poverty, or if we introduce democracy, there will be no poverty. There is no necessary connection. Small groups can starve to death even in democracy if they don't have political clout.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And now I would like to Professor Achin Chakraborty, who is the direct student of PhD student of Professor Pattanaik. He commented that many thanks to Professor Pattanaik for the wonderful lecture. So if Achinda is there, hello,
I think he is not currently in the call.
Oh, okay. So who is the next question?
We have another question from Ms. Su Ming Ku.
Okay. Su, you can unmute and say the question directly.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Pattanaik, for so clearly explaining those things which really people like me who are not mathematically trained have great difficulty to understand, and have some resistance also internally from trying to understand. But I suppose this also relates to a general question of where development thinking is at and where we are applying our comparisons and evaluations of well-being and freedom. So I'm just reading the new Eat Lancet report on the future of food systems in the world. And we can see that the way we are discussing country one, democracy versus country two, non-democracy, these units of analysis are not very useful to compare, and these types of comparisons are no longer very useful because, of course, throughout the world, we are seeing a major failure of our food systems to deliver freedom and well-being to people. And they are, you can say that the food system is malfunctioning and needs to be reformed. And one of the major problems that is facing everyone in the whole world is how can we have a food system that respects the planetary boundaries, 7 out of 9 of which have already been breached and transgressed. So we know that the majority of the world's ecological system is no longer able to continuously deliver well-being and freedom fairly to people. So I guess my question was, I qualified this by admitting I don't think this may even be a coherent question, and also it may not be a fair question to ask you, Professor. But I'm wondering to what extent our theories of individual well-being, interpersonal evaluations, and evaluations of freedoms may have to be extended by this concrete problem of shared constraints of planetary boundaries, which of course are unfairly shared. And if our theories have to be extended, how should we extend them?
Now, this is a question with a vast implication, vast importance, and is raising some of the most fundamental practical issues that we are facing in the world today. What I would like to say, that's the limited issue that I was raising about respecting people's values to some extent. To what extent, I do not know, but to some extent, applies also to international comparisons across countries. Now, what is valid for a given country, a given society, also is valid for across country or across society comparisons. Now, when we are talking about values, then some of the values that one country shares are not necessarily the values that another country shares. Now, saying a country shares is a too strong statement, because what does it mean to say country shares? Does everybody in the country believes in those values? Not necessarily. But in some broad sense, the values differ not only between individuals, between social groups in a given country, but also across countries. The conditions are different. The culture is different. So it raises the same sort of issues. The notion of evaluating everybody's well-being, every country's well-being with the same set of values, irrespective of their stage of development, irrespective of their culture, irrespective of their social values, it seems to be a rather unattractive way of looking at things. But at the moment, we are being forced to do that because we don't know how to do it by any other means, because we don't have any empirically based method. How do I compare the notion of well-being in one country with the notion of well-being in another country? We don't have any empirical basis.
When yes, it's a very, very difficult question, Professor. Very difficult. And I think it's very interesting, this Commission's report, because it's proposing this new planetary health diet, PHD. And it says it must be available, affordable, convenient, aspirational, appealing, and delicious. It has to increase demand for healthy, sustainable diets and enable necessary dietary shifts. It has to change the food environment and have food environment interventions. It has to have next generation culinary research and development, and as well as increased purchasing power. It has to protect and promote healthy traditional diets and other important actions. So it is so complex what they're asking for. But it is no longer possible for us to keep saying, well, it's impossible for us to have an aggregate model because it seems that the food system must change. Simply because it is not possible for it to keep going on, making billions of people unwell, hungry, food insecure, and overstep the boundaries of our planet. So yes, I really appreciate what you're saying, and that our models can't do this. But my question is a little bit around that concrete need, that the models need to be improved. Maybe to be more humble, but also to be more broad-minded and to be more urgent, because we can't just have uncertainty.
I entirely agree with you. Our models are still not capable of tackling these big issues and extremely urgent issues. But the thing is, you see, my point is this: we are unable to handle these big issues. But even if we make some working assumptions, even if we have an imperfect analysis is better than absence of complete analysis. But even then, we have to make a choice about what is more important for us. Therefore, we shall pay urgent attention, and what is we can ignore for the time being. And while doing the more important things and ignoring some of the less important things, we have to make some assumptions. These assumptions may be limited, but so I have no problem with working with limiting assumptions. But at the same time, we need to realize that our analysis has weakness, has these limitations. We must not claim too much for our analysis. But thank you for your questions.
Thank you, my friend Sue. Sir, may I ask a question?
Please.
Sir, my first question was actually during our earlier correspondence I have posed.
Sorry?
That is, during our earlier correspondence I have raised that you actually call capability as functional and capability. So why functioning has to be mentioned separately and early than articulating the capability approach, the theory itself. So that is my first question. And the other question is actually for a couple of days we are concerned about the potential famine, looming famine threat in Gaza. And some flotilla group of boats were approaching with food support and some shelter support. So my question was, what is there any true possibility of occurring real famine there? First, and second, if famine is going to outbreak very near soon, then the Israeli soldiers have forbidden outsiders to enter that territory to deliver food. So, what are the how can we tackle that potential danger?
Sorry, may I just interrupt before Professor Pattanaik, in his response, gives his honest response and is picked up and taken to jail. So I just to response to your question.
Yes.
I'll say one thing that Professor Pattanaik did not emphasize, and that's the ability to put oneself in someone else's position, the importance of empathy. I will address both the questions. Let me address the Middle Eastern question first. And I have friends on both sides. And the only way it can be solved is if my friend who supports Israel is able to honestly answer, what would I do if I were a Palestinian? And a Palestinian were able to answer, what would I do if I were an Israeli? And neither side is at the moment willing to put themselves in the other person's shoes. And in my opinion, that's causing the problem. And there is no question that there's famine in Gaza. Let me say that explicitly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I don't know whether that answered your question
Yes,
or not,
yes.
but it will keep Professor Pattanaik out of jail.
So Rajat has answered the second question, in my opinion, very adequately.
Yes.
May I comment on your first question?
Yes.
Which is a more sort of modeling question.
Yes.
One way of modeling would be to say, okay, I shall consider the sense notion of freedom, how much freedom an individual is enjoying, the freedom in the sense of being able to choose one functioning bundle from a set of functioning bundles that are available to the individual. Now, freedom, one way of modeling is to consider freedom itself to be a functioning, as you are saying. So why make a distinction between the other thing? If you do that, then what happens? Some of the functionings are becoming, the notion of functioning is becoming necessary to define the notion of freedom also. Because freedom is being defined in terms of the ability to choose one from a set of functioning bundles, so that it needs the notion of functioning bundles. Now, there the philosophers typically bring in the notion of supervenience, that it's supervenient on another set of notions. But instead of doing that, my preferred way of modeling would be to use the word functioning altogether, for the simple word functioning altogether for freedom. Instead, I would say that this, what Sen calls functionings or functioning bundles, these are referring to one type of functioning, what I would call type 1 functioning. And freedom I would call type 2 functioning. There's a difference between the two in the sense that the second notion is dependent on my prior definition of functionings. You see what I'm saying? Unless I have been able to define functionings first and the set of functionings from which I'm choosing, I have no way of defining the second notion of freedom, which is considered functioning. So just for analytical convenience, I would rather use type 1 functioning and type 2 functioning. Type 2 functioning is freedom. Type 1 functionings are all the other things that Sen is considered to be functionings. So to some extent, it's a matter of choice of terminology. And I do the same thing with respect to another notion also. Now, the term capability is used in various senses in the literature. Sometimes the same person is using the notion of capability in two different senses. So I would rather avoid this possible confusion and use the word opportunity set instead of capability. Anywhere where a term has been used in many different senses, I tend to avoid that term. Instead, I shall say that, okay, I'm using this term and this means this, according to my definition. So that's why frequently I have used the term opportunity set rather than capability. Though capability is a much wider used word. But sometimes same persons have used this term capability in different ways in different parts of the writing.
Oh, that's very convincing. I'm clear. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, other questions? Anyone who has want to ask question, Professor Pattanaik? Professor Kishore Khanna from Nepal. He will ask question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Pattanaik, for your wonderful lecture. My question for you is, are all the M functionings that you mentioned in your article are distinguishable? Aren't there some functionings that occur jointly, like, for example, able to sing a song and being able to speak?
Sorry, when you said some functioning which can occur together.
Yes.
Like you want to sing and sleep simultaneously.
Yes, able to sing a song and able to speak. Those come simultaneously, because if a person is not able to speak, he or she cannot sing a song. So in such a cases, how can we model our these all the things that you explained in your paper? This one, minimum relativism, dominance, and standard of living comparisons based on functionings.
Now, when I am saying this, suppose I consider singing to be being able to sing is a functioning for me, and being able to sleep is a functioning for me.
Able to speak.
Being able to speak is a functioning for me, and able to sleep or able to speak and sing.
Sing, yes.
Okay. Now, when you are saying that this is a functioning thing and that one is functioning for me. Now, singing, suppose I consider to be, say, at night from, say, 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock, morning, night. Now, if I sing during that time, I can simultaneously sleep at that time. So then I have to impose some restriction of set of functioning bundles which are available to me. It's not physically possible to sleep and to speak or sing at the same time. Therefore, I would have to specify that some functioning bundles are not feasible. A functioning bundle where I'm singing from 8 to 8, 8 at night, at 8 in the morning, and another case, I can sleep or speak for 12 hours, but cannot sing during that time. So sleeping and singing at the same time is not a feasible option for me. In other words, I have to modify my notion of what is feasible. If it is impossible for me to sing and sleep simultaneously, then sleeping and singing simultaneously at the same point of time is not available to me. I have to modify my notion of feasible set.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir.
Professor Pattanaik, my supervisor, Professor Dr. Auladusan sir is here. So, Professor Dr. Auladusan sir, can you hear me? Professor Aulad sir, he may not be.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sir, here is
Actually,
my thesis supervisor, Dr. Aulad Hussain sir. Here is Dr. Pattanaik sir.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hello. This is a nice environment. I'm really happy to see all the participants, and especially, we really enjoyed Professor Pattanaik, fantastic, wonderful lecture. But I'm missing actually. Enter at the end of the lecture. That is, I got around 10 minutes of your lecture, which was really fantastic and engaging so much. So in my point of view, actually, I did not actually carry any question. If I got the YouTube channel, I actually thoroughly listen all the issues, and then I will make a particular question about capabilities and as well as functioning well-being issues. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So any comments or any questions? We are very near to close our today's session.
Yeah, Rani bhai, there is no more questions here.
Okay.
I think if there is any announcement we want to make, this will be a good time.
Yes. Actually, there are two announcements. One is actually, I should address this at the beginning. Actually, after the second session, there are 4 more participants who add in our program. They will only join. They would only be able to join 9 sessions. Rest of 9 sessions, including this one. So for them, I think there has to be 2 announcements. The previous participants already know about this. That is, in every lecture, we have a essay competition. Because first round essay competition has already been evaluated, and we have announced the result through our email. The jury board, there is a jury board we have formed, and jury board evaluated those essays on the first lecture. That was Dr. Prasanta Pattanaik sir's lecture. And then now we just completed the deadline of second round essay competition, which is on Professor Paul Anand's lecture. And based on after evaluating those, and there is an announcement. I am declaring it now that based on round 3 essay competition, round 3 of individual well-being and social welfare, based on today's lecture, we'll start from this moment, and the submission deadline would be 10 of October. So I'll send an email of this announcement. And then for Bengali speaking community, there is a recap session. The earlier recap session based on Professor Paul Anand's lecture has already taken, and most of you liked it very much. That is taken by Professor Achin Chakraborty, who is the direct student of Professor Pattanaik, sir. And Professor Achin Chakraborty will take tomorrow a recap session based on today's lecture of Professor Pattanaik. So I think tomorrow at the same time we will join for Bengali language recap session. Those who are interested, you could join here. And one more thing, that is, those who missed the any session or the inaugural, they can have an access to the recording, because all the recordings we have uploaded on the YouTube. So I have already shared the YouTube links, and today's lecture will be also uploaded on the YouTube, so that you can listen to listen to attentive and point of view. So I think Professor Prasanta K. So Sir is our convener, as you all know, and with his guidance and leadership, we, we prepared this lecture plan, and all these distinguished scholars have joined since he requested them to lecture their specialized areas. So I think today is the last session of his lecture in this series. So Professor Pattanaik, would you like to say something or just something, because the full lecture of two of your full lectures by today, it is concluding. So, so would you like to say something? How is your experience, and did we meet your expectation or not? I don't know.
No, I think this is a wonderful thing that you have arranged. I find it very stimulating, and the questions I appreciate, because sometimes when you are working in an area, one becomes so involved in that area that one forgets there is an outside view of that area. It's very important to know what is the outside view of what you are doing, because sometimes it requires a sort of distance detachment in order to find the fault in what one is doing. Only when somebody outside the area points out, it becomes clearer. So I appreciate the questions very much.
Thank you, sir. And we are very grateful that such a stalwart professor like you, we have time to get in touch with you and get share your experience, and with sharing your experience and wisdom, that is very rare, and we are very privileged and lucky to have you. As we are very grateful to from bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
So with that, I am concluding today's lecture, today's session, and from each and every individual participants, I convey their love and respect and admiration to our legendary Professor Dr. Prasanta K. So namaskar and thank you and bye. Bye.